Welcome, folks. Welcome to the Mobility Learning Community. I'm Zoe Miller, and I'm the Executive Director of the Moving Maine Network. We expect to have a pretty good-sized group today, so we're inviting folks to introduce themselves to one another in the chat. Once we get going, we will ask you to refrain from chatting while we're meeting because folks may not know that if you're blind and you're using a screen reader and folks are active in the chat, that's like listening to two conversations. So we'll refrain from chats during the meeting, but right now go ahead and put your name, your community, your organization in the chat, and we'll get started in just a minute. All right, so I'm gonna get us started off with just a little bit of housekeeping and some background on the Moving Maine Network. So thanks so much, everybody, for being here today. This is our mobility learning community. It's something we do about 5 times a year. And we're really excited today to have this focus on what non-drivers want the world to know. So we'll have a couple of presentations. We'll have a lot of conversation, and there'll be time for you all to ask questions towards the end. For those who don't know the Moving Maine Network, I wanted to just share a little bit about us. We see our role as building a movement to ensure that transportation access and equity are available for every person in Maine. And our vision is a Maine where all people have access to transportation, no matter where they live, what their background is, where they're trying to get to. And we do that first and foremost by cultivating community. So we bring people together in community from across the state. And basically, if you care about transportation access, you are welcome to come to our table. We also do a lot of work around supporting advocacy and good policy. And so we love the opportunity to have decision makers come to the table and have folks with lived experience get to speak directly to decision makers and let them know what their needs are. We also work to catalyze solutions, and so we're involved with several kind of on-the-ground efforts that are advancing access to help paying for bus fare and also to getting more mobility management programming to happen in Maine. And just to be clear, I'm going to go back here. We often get this question of like, are we just about buses? And we want to be clear that we're advocating for quality, affordable rides. And that may be that it's somebody's personal vehicle and they're volunteering for a community driver program. It may be a big bus. It may be a train. We also are focused on safe and accessible streets and roads. We know that most people spend at least part of their day getting around outside of a motorized vehicle. For folks with affordability issues and people who can't drive, that's even more likely. And at the end, at the level that we're focused, we're really thinking about what are the policies and practices that are needed to get access for more people in Maine, and to bring about solutions that can impact the most people possible. And so, we are happy to talk with you, talk with your community, provide some assistance in figuring out how you get solutions to happen. We love to do that. So I lost track of my window here. Sorry, I don't know if you're not what I wanted to do. Okay, I'm actually going to stop sharing because I lost my slides. But that's okay. So basically today, what we wanted to do first is we'll be hearing from Anna Zivarts, who, came to Maine actually just around this time last year and was part of our Transportation Justice Summit and has become a colleague and contact of mine. We root each other on with the work that is happening in Washington State, where Anna is, and here in Maine. And then we'll be bringing in a conversation with non-drivers from right here in Maine and hearing from a kind of a range of different perspectives. So with that, when we get through those pieces, then we'll open it up to question and answer with all of you. So I'm going to turn it over to Anna to do her presentation.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Zoe. And really, thanks for inviting me to present to your group in this community learning space. I'm actually just started a similar sort of community learning space in Washington. I might even steal the name community learning space right now. We're like a seminar. I was trying to think of a good name for it. So really excited to be here today, and we'll have some exchange when I invite you all to come to speak to folks in Washington State who are doing transportation organizing. So let's see. Is it possible to start my slides?
Sorry, Anna. Yes, they are. I think they're sharing.
Are they showing? Okay, why am I not seeing them? Oh dear. Oh, there we go. I see it now.
Okay.
My fault. I just clicked on the wrong tab. All right. So just for practices of accessibility, I am going to verbally describe everything I'm presenting here visually as well. So don't worry, you won't miss anything if you are not able to see the screen for whatever reason. So this first screen has my name on it, Anna Zivarts, and how to reach me. It's anna@nondrivers.org, and nondrivers.org is the organization. There's an image of some folks waiting at a bus stop in twilight in St. Louis, Missouri. And then also an image of the cover of the book I wrote about transportation access for non-drivers. And it's called When Driving is Not an Option. If you are interested in it, highly recommend requesting it from your local library. If they don't already have it, they can order it, and then lots of people will get access to it. It came out last year from Island Press. And so what I'm going to be talking to you today about is really what it means to be a non-driver, what this sort of concept, how it exists, why it exists, and how it can be useful. So we can go to the next slide. Oh, and is it updating? First of all, I guess I'll start with sort of a background of how I started working with this concept. And my story is that I grew up with a visual impairment called nystagmus that makes my eyes shake a little bit all the time. And that means that I do not see well enough to drive, could not pass the vision test at the DMV as a teenager to get my license. And so for many years, I intentionally lived places where there was really great transit. I moved from a pretty rural part of Washington State to California and then to New York City. And I lived mostly in New York City for around 15 years and then had a kid, and life got expensive and needed to move back home closer to family. And so I moved back to Washington State in 2018 and started working at a disability rights organization where I met a lot of other people who couldn't drive because of their disabilities. And that was exciting for me because I had felt growing up in Washington State that I was the only, person I thought who couldn't drive. And that really wasn't true. And so, we can go back for a sec. And so, that really made me think about, gosh, who are all the different kinds of people who can't drive, can't afford to drive, choose not to drive, have aged out of driving, are too young to drive. We started doing the Story Map project at Disability Rights Washington, where we wanted to interview non-drivers. And very quickly, it became obvious to me that it wasn't possible to sort of draw hard lines between, who is a disabled non-driver and who is just a non-driver because they can't afford a car. Often disability and poverty were, interacting with each other. People, were disabled and therefore didn't have a job that paid them well enough to afford a car, or maybe they needed a car with hand controls. That's the story here of Erica, who's pictured in the bottom middle of the screen. She's a power chair user from Seattle and, could drive a car if she could afford a car that could accommodate her power wheelchair, but she can't. And so, she is a non-driver. So that's sort of where this idea in my head around non-drivers came from, and sort of building a coalition of folks around this identity of non-driver, around having similar access needs, right? We all want to be able to get places, and none of us can reliably do so by driving ourselves. And so how can we start to advocate together for communities that work better for non-drivers, whether that's transit, paratransit, maybe it's in more rural areas, some, volunteer or other community service ride providers. Maybe it's walkable or bikeable communities. Maybe it's having safe infrastructure to be able to, get where you need to go, or affordable housing, right? That's close enough to the places you need to get to. So, starting to think about how we all have these common interests and how we can work together as a broader community. So just to touch base really quickly on sort of the different kinds of non-drivers. So you're thinking broadly about this, because I think we often get kind of stuck in our own little groups, or, perhaps you're in a bike advocacy group and other cyclists who want a bike for transportation, but you're not thinking of how your needs might overlap with old folks who are aging out of of driving and maybe want to be able to use a bike or an e-bike or an e-trike to get around. Or younger people, right, who would like to be able to get around but can't drive yet and maybe don't want to drive. So there's some additional images here on the screen I'm just going to describe to give you some ideas. I mentioned young people who can't drive and don't want to drive. There's a picture of my kid and another kid waiting for the school bus. So people who are not old enough to drive are also non-drivers, as are people who are perhaps old enough to drive, over the age of 16, but perhaps can't afford a car, are really anxious about driving, don't want to drive. There's an image above that of some young people, some high school students waiting for the bus in my neighborhood. And increasingly young people, old enough to drive, but are choosing not to. From when I was a 16-year-old in the 90s till now, when I was a 16-year-old, about 50% of 16-year-olds got their license at 16. Now that's down to 25%. So a big decrease in the percentage of young drivers in the US, and young people really feeling that urgency to drive. So disabled people, right, are part of non-drivers too. There's this picture of Erica. Above that, there's a picture of Cody Shane, who's someone with developmental disabilities who lives in a rural community in Washington State. And through his community uses a trike to get around. When he wants to go out of town, he uses rural transit service. Then there's people who can't afford to drive. Car ownership is expensive. Owning a car for every adult of, driving capacity in your household can be very expensive. And so we see transit ridership, especially in communities of color and low income and immigrant communities, really high. And there's an image here of some folks waiting for the bus in Seattle, or on the bus in Seattle, who during the pandemic, when ridership on a lot of our routes went away, except for the routes that served communities where there really, people didn't have the option of not driving, of driving, and so needed to ride the bus. And then finally, these last two images on the far left of the screen are images of my grandmas, who both aged out of driving in really different circumstances. On the upper corner is the image of my grandma on my mom's side, who spent the last 30 years of her life with pretty limited vision. And so she was living in Long Island and decided that she wanted to live in Waikiki in Hawaii. It was sort of her dream. And part of the dream of living there was that she could live in an apartment tower and go, walk across the street to the grocery store. And so she didn't need to drive, walk to the beach, right? And so there's an image of me as a little girl and her on the beach in Honolulu. And then below that is an image of my other grandma, a really sort of different experience, who, developed a condition in later life that meant she would lose consciousness unexpectedly, low blood pressure, I think. And so she lived in rural Indiana, on a farm, really, really didn't want to live anywhere else, wanted to live with her animals, didn't want to move into a nursing home. And so she decided she was just going to keep driving and nobody could take the keys away from her. And she would pass out while driving, but luckily it was such a rural area and so flat that she mostly just would drive off the road into the ditch. And that happened a couple of times. And then luckily, that's not how she died. She passed away in her sleep peacefully. Really hard situation for her to have to choose between doing something that carried a lot of risk, driving with this condition, and having to give up the community and the animals and the place that she loved. So if we take all of these non-drivers, that I described, as well as people who perhaps could have a license or could own a car, could afford to, but live in a place where they don't need to, because transit's relatively great, or they can walk or bike where they need to go. All together, and we can go to the next slide. All together, we are about a third of the population in the U.S. And I start with sort of the individual sort of segments of the non-driver community, because I think when you say this number, a third of the population, people are like, what? No, that can't be true. I have some national data here, and I know that Zoe has been doing research and community surveys and has some data from Maine as well. But nationally, and this is exciting, this is a new research project that just came out from NRDC in October, or late September perhaps, found that 36.6% of people over the age of 10 in the US do not have reliable access to a car. If you want to dig into that data, you can actually go census tract by census tract and poke around. If you Google NRDC and non-drivers or car-free households, it'll show up. Interestingly, they also found that 73% of people with disabilities don't drive for most of their trips. And I think that's a really important statistic, because there's so often this narrative that, well, disabled people, need drive and can only drive. When the reality is that for many of us, it's not a safe or reliable option. And so I think that's an important statistic to remember. And this image on the right is a very crowded bus in Hawaii, actually, where the bus system there, because car ownership is so expensive, and there's generally just a very high cost of living, bus ridership is high. And on the island of Oahu, transit service covers 96% of the population has access to transit, which I think is pretty cool. So just something to think about as we're thinking about what is possible as far as building the communities that can work better for non-drivers. So that's the end of my little presentation, and I will turn it back over to you guys. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Anna. We'll have an opportunity during our kind of open Q&A for you to ask questions of Anna, but definitely recommend her book. It's a pretty fun read and eye-opening. So next, I'd like to invite Kristi Woods to come off mute and introduce yourself. And I'm intentionally not giving bios for people because they are going to tell you themselves about themselves. So we'll hear from Kristi, and then we'll hear from Steve Hoad, and then the three of us will have a conversation. So Kristi, over to you.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Kristi Woods. I'm a resident of Augusta. I have an illness called myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome. For short, we can say MECFS. It's a very poorly recognized post-viral chronic condition that causes whole body symptoms and energy limitations that can fluctuate daily. About half of people that have long COVID actually meet the criteria for MECFS. The difference being, I have no idea what virus caused mine, because I started having symptoms in 2010. So it was way before COVID. Before the illness progressed to being fully disabled and mostly homebound, I worked as a nurse in multiple capacities over 9 years. And during that time, although I was still ill, my symptoms were mostly not impeding my ability to drive. However, as my illness became more severe in the last 3 years, I've had inconsistent driving abilities with some periods of being completely unable to drive at all. And at best, on a good day, I can drive in town, planned short circumstances within a few miles of my home. And oftentimes I have to use either my own mobility aids, I have a wheelchair and I have a walker, or use what a store might have available for like an electric scooter. So due to my disorder and driving and riding in a car both actually trigger symptoms of dizziness, nausea, weakness, fatigue, and cognitive impairment, among other things. So when I exert past my energy level for that given day, it ends up leaving me unable to leave my bed for days, and that's even doing simple tasks like driving. So then that begs the question, like, is driving really worth it if it's going to end up putting me in bed for a few days? So that's where I'm at as far as driving and my experience. And yeah.
Thanks so much, Kristi. Now I'd like to invite Steve Hoad, who I understand that Steve's camera is not working. But I'd like to bring Steve on to introduce himself.
So I'm Steve Hoad. I am living very rurally in Windsor, Maine, which actually is right next to the town of Augusta, but we have no services for public transportation. I have been blind since birth, and I grew up originally in a town that was full of transit in southern New Jersey, and loved transit, buses, trains, things like that. And here I am now. Up until a couple of years ago, I did have access to a vehicle because my wife was a driver. However, because we were both kind of contract workers, our paths differed a lot. So I experienced a lack of transportation lots of times. I've done a lot of hitchhiking around Maine. I have actually done some out-of-state hitchhiking as well. That's not really fun, but it's necessary. So I want to apologize too. Much like me, my computer seems to be blind today. My camera just doesn't want to work, so I'm not on video. I currently have sort of retired and have decided that I think I should put some time into trying to see if I can create some transportation opportunities in my town. And so I've begun to work on that a little bit. Being a blind person, I can't even, well, I shouldn't even, I guess I should say, ride a bike because I know how to ride a bike. I'm really not interested in riding bikes on 40 and 50 mile an hour roads, though. So I don't do that either. I am a pedestrian, and being a pedestrian, I really guess I should take a minute and ask us all to honor and think about what it's like to be a pedestrian on 50 mile an hour roads. We have had 2 pedestrians killed here in the last few days in Maine. And if you read the national trends, pedestrian deaths are increasing. And I'm concerned about that. With Maine being a population that is the oldest in the United States, we are approaching a time when our percentage of non-drivers may increase radically. And I hope we can put something in line to make that happen. It's kind of my work right now, is to see if I can get something done.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. So for the next segment of our session today, what we wanted to do is kind of have a conversation with Kristi and Steve, and I may also bring Anna back in as she's available. And so first, I wanted to go to you, Kristi, and ask you to share a bit more about difficulties that you and other non-drivers have with our existing transportation system or systems, and particularly how the lack of coordination between healthcare providers and transportation providers impacts non-drivers. Oh, you are on mute.
There we go.
Mhm.
So where my illness is really poorly understood, unfortunately, over the years, like as I've progressed with more comorbidities and more symptoms, I really could not get any help locally, and I had to go further and further from home. In the past, I had a lot more ability to be able to go outside of my home, and I know that's a lot of like privilege compared to other people where I was like sick, but not sick enough where I couldn't drive myself. You know, I had insurance through my employer at the time, so I had a lot more flexibility of where I could go, and then I could afford it because I was working at the time. But that's not the case, you know, for everybody. So over the last 2.5 years is kind of when I really became unable to drive, and it made it so much more difficult to get to those providers because now my providers are in Lewiston, Brunswick, Portland, Portsmouth, and I've had to go to Boston a couple times as well. So when I first qualified for Medicaid, when I officially couldn't go back to work, I had to use the ride service for appointments, which has its challenges. Namely, it's very unreliable, and um, additionally, like it adds a lot of legwork to being an ill person. I'm going to dive into that, I think, more later. Because I think we're going to be discussing more about the coordination and the toll that it takes on people. So one of the things that I wanted to say that's more kind of just the Medicaid part is that the ride services requires you to have a letter from a provider that's very specific, that says that you can go see this other provider 20 miles outside of your home, because of whatever circumstance, like there's no one else that can specialize in it, or like I'm too complicated for down here, or up here rather, etc. So that's very difficult when you're trying to ask your doctor to do social security paperwork and like paperwork for FMLA and trying to get them to write letters. When I think over the course of the couple years I had Medicaid, I had like at least 10 letters that I had to get. And I'd have to oftentimes call to make sure KB Cap it was there so I could set up a ride. They didn't have it. I had to call my primary care, and I had to then like ask them to resend it and keep checking back and forth because they weren't communicating with each other. So when you have energy limitations, like that's really difficult to try and call back and forth to make sure that something gets to there. And the other difficulty is that because of the unreliability of the Medicaid drivers, I've had to cancel, or I've just completely missed appointments last minute because the ride didn't get to me on time, or they canceled last minute because I didn't have any drivers. And every doctor's office has different rules on canceling appointments. So one of the like more extremes for me, I got a cancellation same day. I immediately called the office that I was going to in Auburn. It was the only dental provider I could get to after like a year of trying to find a dentist. And they had said to me, well, because you canceled your appointment without notice, you can't schedule an appointment for another year. And I just felt that that was extremely discriminatory for those practices to have no flexibility in their exceptions because the ride was canceled at no fault of my own. So not only that, but you are often not the only one in the car. So trying to maximize their resources with the amount of people that need a ride. So going from my house to the appointment, I was oftentimes like getting picked up maybe an hour or more before my appointment, and I'd have to ride around central Maine to different places. I've even gone out to like Vassalboro and China and stuff like that when I was trying to get to Waterville when I was doing infusions. And so that's really difficult with that extra wait time because it increases those symptoms that I talked about in the beginning when I was introducing myself. So that ended up impacting my energy levels. I'd end up in bed for a few days because I would be so wiped out from going to that appointment. Whereas like if you can drive yourself, you just get in the car and you go, and you don't have that extra time that you're spending trying to just get a ride to your appointment. So, and there's no great public transportation system in Augusta to get to some of these other places. You can get a bus to Portland, and then I have to coordinate a ride if I was going to get an Uber to the appointment and back to get back to the bus. But to Brunswick, there's not really any like really direct way to get to Brunswick or Portsmouth from here. And family and friends, they pitch in a lot, but it's really hard where I have so many appointments. Like I think I've averaged at least one appointment a week. And where my family and friends live far away and they're working normal business hours and my appointments are normal business hours, it makes it really hard for them to manage around their work schedule and their time off to bring me to appointments. And now that I have lost Medicaid because I did finally get awarded Social Security disability benefits and it's too much for Medicaid. Now I have no Medicaid ride service. So even though it was flawed, it was something. And now I have to try to rely on family and friends to take me. So it's quite difficult.
Thank you, Kristi. I'd like to go to Steve I know Steve has some insights from his experience being driven by other folks for many years. Steve, can you share some of your tips for drivers about what they should and shouldn't do?
Well, first, I guess I'd have to say I concur with Kristi on many points regarding the system for transportation that either is or is not available depending upon your income level. And then I guess if I were driving somebody, one of the things that I would think about is who is this person and what their needs might be. And my first point in that is I would hope that anyone driving any person at all would first ask them if they needed help. Unfortunately, in the past, I've been grabbed by my clothes. I have been essentially dragged into a vehicle or to a vehicle. And I'm a pretty independent person. I use a white cane and I have operated independently with a white cane for 65 years or so. So it is very disconcerting to have that happen. Another funny little thing that isn't funny when it happens, but it's something that's very common, is that people want you to think their way. Whether they go to church and they want to share their church information with you, or they think that sports are the best thing in the world and they want to share that with you. Don't overshare too much, because sometimes it's a little grating. And my religion is maybe not acceptable to you. And so maybe we shouldn't even talk about that. I don't mind if you invite me to your church, but then you don't have to give me every little detail about it. One of the things I think that's really important is, as a blind person, when I get into your vehicle, I might say to you, if I don't know you, that when we get to the destination, I might at least need to know where the entry door is. Now, that doesn't mean you even have to walk me to the door, but it does mean I might need a little set of directions. And some folks, I have found many folks actually, that it's hard for them to know their right from their left. And so maybe you do have to get out of your vehicle and give me an assistance if you have trouble telling your right from your left. I have a pretty good grasp of geography, and having hitchhiked a lot, I know which direction I'm going in most of the time. And so you can choose your own way if you like, or maybe I can help you with directions. Don't feel as though because I can't drive, I don't know my way around. One of the things that I've talked with a lot of people about is regarding the possibility that they might be, I guess, affected by the fact that I'm a blind person riding in their car. I'm just like another person. The only difference is that I'm blind. Um, I'm not a higher insurance risk than anybody that you might pick up, and I'm certainly not any smarter or any less intelligent than anybody else you might pick up. So there's no big difference between you and I, except that my eyes don't work and yours do. Those are really the basics of driving a person like me or any non-driver. One thing I might say is that I sure do appreciate anytime I can get a ride. And so I will be grateful. And hopefully we can have some polite conversation, and that's fine and fun.
Thanks, Steve. So now I wanted to bring in with a couple folks who we have on deck to share one specific insight. And so we have Sadie Donnell, and Sadie, I'd like to ask you to share about the white cane law, which I would actually, let's see. Okay, yeah, I promoted you here so you can, you're pinned on the screen. Yeah, Sadie, do you want to just tell us who you are and what the white cane law is?
Absolutely. Thank you, Zoe. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Sadie Donnell. I live in Gorham. I wear a whole lot of hats. I work for the Maine Department of Labor. I'm also an entrepreneur. I own a vending business, and I'm actually the chair of the Maine Business Enterprise Program, which is a program for blind and visually impaired entrepreneurs. I'm the president of Pine Tree Guide Dog Users, which is a local guide dog users group, or for people who are either have guide dogs, want to get a guide dog, have had a guide dog, or as I like to put it, are guide dog adjacent. Those can be puppy raisers, trainers, people who work in the blind or visually impaired community, friends, family, etc. I'm also on the board of directors for the Regional Transportation Program, which is in the Greater Portland area and provides paratransit and non-emergency medical transportation. So I'm involved in a lot of stuff, as well as a lot of transportation advocacy, as you can tell. So what I'm sort of advocating and trying to create awareness about currently is Maine's white cane law. That's sort of its generic name, if you will, but it is actually Title 17, Chapter 47, specifically Section 1313. And basically the short answer about that is it provides an opportunity for blind people, oddly enough, to be seen and recognized. So if you are a driver, you have the responsibility to yield to a blind or visually impaired person. Most of the time, this person would be carrying a white cane or have a visible guide dog, but it is not required. It creates essentially a liability. It puts the driver on notice that they are responsible for seeing that blind person and yielding to that blind person. And failure to yield to a blind person can actually result in a penalty between $50 to $1,000, actually. And what failure to yield really means is we have the right of way as blind or visually impaired folks. So that means if we're walking down the shoulder, you need to make sure that you're giving us ample space. It also means, obviously, if we're in a crosswalk, you're obligated to stop, but you're also obligated to stop and let us cross if we are not in a crosswalk. So if we're visibly perpendicular to the road, standing on the edge of the road, and we are looking to cross, you as the driver are obligated to slow down and come to a complete stop until we are safely on the opposite side of the street. Not to wait for us to get to the center of the street and then, buzz our backs, but actually to completely come to a stop and make sure that we are safely on the other side before you carry on your way. And most people are not aware of this law. In my personal experience, especially lately, people seem to be very unaware of what a blind person even seems to look like. Personally, I've been having a lot of difficulty crossing my own street. I live on a pretty main street. It's a 2-lane road. It's supposed to have a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, but that frequently is not the case. Most people seem to speed down that road. I don't have a crosswalk readily available to me. I don't live close to an intersection. So what I have been doing is standing on the side of the road with my guide dog. My guide dog will be approximately a step in front of me. I've also taken to having a white cane in my opposite hand, and I will extend my arm out straight with the white cane out in front of me, up and down, and even sometimes kind of move my arm up and down. And I'm noticing that drivers will slow down, but they tend to go around me and not stop for me to cross the street. So I'm kind of on a crusade this year to try to create more awareness about the white cane law and about blind pedestrians, so that folks are aware that they are under the obligation to yield to us so that we can have a safe opportunity to cross the street. And what that sort of looks like in terms of a safe opportunity, I just kind of wanted to speak a little bit about that, because I think you don't understand what someone else's experience is unless they sort of explain it to you. So this is my personal experience, but we as blind and visually impaired people are very impacted by ambient noise. So if you think about it, when you close your eyes, all you can really rely on when you're trying to cross the street is your hearing. So that's of critical importance to our safety. So if the person across the street is, say, mowing the lawn, we're not going to be able to hear as well. If the last vehicle that came rumbling by was a large dump truck, or a very large pickup truck with a specialized exhaust, for example, which seems to be the bane of my existence lately, it makes it very hard for us to hear. And we may not be able to hear traffic effectively to get across the street. And this creates a high level of risk for us. So we appreciate it when drivers stop for us, but we may not also be able to hear that you have stopped. So that's a big deal for us as well. So what I encourage drivers to do is obviously be polite and courteous. Take the opportunity to be polite and have a sense of community. Roll your window down as the driver who has stopped for the blind person. Take in that ambient noise. Do you have an electric or hybrid vehicle that when it comes to a stop is completely silent? We're not going to know that you're even there. You're like a ghost. So take the opportunity to roll your window down, say, I've stopped for you in the close lane. There's no traffic in the far lane. You can go whenever you're ready, that kind of thing. Or, if it's, raining, or there's some sort of a situation where you can't put your window down or you're too far away, just give a friendly bop on the horn, like a little beep, beep, I'm here, I'm stopping, I'm not moving, you're all set. And then let that blind person make that decision when they are comfortable to go across the street. I've had a couple situations where someone has stopped for me and I didn't hear them. I didn't know they were there, or traffic in the further lane won't stop for me. So they give up and then they go. They don't want to wait for me anymore, and they sort of take off. And that's risky for us too, because if we've decided that we're ready to step out into that lane, and then that person decides they're giving up, they could hit us. So there's a lot of situations that are a very high risk for us just to get across a basic 2-lane road, never mind at intersections and that sort of thing, which is why this law exists. And that's to try to help create that, put that responsibility onto the driver to try to take an extra step to help protect us and make sure that we're safe.
Thanks so much, Sadie. And now I'm going to go to Brendan Williams to talk about a different experience with navigating the streets. So can you share just briefly about your experience with cyclists and as and introduce yourself and what your situation is first.
Hello, thank you for having me here. I'm a white male with a beard, curly hair, and I wearing a blue sweater with an olive green background behind me. I just wanted to put that out, an audio description of what I look like since we're on that topic. Quickly, I'm also hard of hearing. To prove that to everybody, what did you just say? Cycle, like bikes? We're talking about
Sorry,
bikes?
yes. So you had shared about your experience with folks riding bicycles or cycling.
Okay, I thought you said cyclist.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, wrong Zoom call then. So yes, I don't have a car. I walk everywhere. One of my concerns, I live in Saco now, but when I lived in South Portland, I lived right on the green belt, which is a bike slash walking path. And I try to avoid, I listen to music like everybody else in the world, but I try to avoid putting headphones in because bikers would come behind me. Still couldn't hear them because they have a little bell, and the loss of my hearing, I can't hear high frequency noises. So one of the ideas when I was and I know Joe knows this, when I was on the South Portland Transportation Committee and involved in city politics was to make the Greenbelt, if anyone knows South Portland area, to make it 2 lanes. So you have walking and you have biking, as it was when I lived in Marin County in California, where I grew up, because that's how it was there. Because it is very concerning, especially when you're on the Costco Bay Bridge and the lane's smaller, and in the summer you got bike tours, groups of bikers coming up behind you, trying to get by you, and I don't have eyes in the back of my head, so I can't see them. And so it can be very difficult.
I think Brendan may have dropped from, it looked like he was glitching a little bit. Okay, well, hopefully he'll rejoin the meeting.
Okay. I don't know.
Are you there? Okay.
Yeah. Sorry about that. So the biker thing, it can be difficult when you're a walker and you have bikers coming behind you. E-bikes are faster. That's a new thing, and towns are trying to deal with that. And I've advocated for, e-bikes, but in some restriction. Because I've been hit behind before. Didn't injure myself or anything, but it can be scary. And so that's a concern out there. Yep.
Thank you so much, Brendan. So we'd love to move into questions and answers now. And if folks want to raise their hand or put a question in the chat, we'll do our best to bring everybody into the conversation. I know that we had a question in the chat earlier about asking about the status of a law that passed in the summer. And I think if I understand what Erica's talking about, it's related to LD 1451, which is to create an action plan to basically bring together Maine DOT and other state agencies to coordinate and work towards having a mobility management program for Maine. That working group has started meeting. Very excited that Moving Maine is a part of it. And if folks would like to keep up with what's going on, I just put a link in the chat. You can attend the meetings. They'll be held on Zoom. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any comments or suggestions around the accessibility of the information that I just put in the chat. So moving on, I wanted to open it up to questions from the audience. And again, if anybody has wants to ask a question, you can raise your hand. And actually, so while folks are thinking of questions, one thing I wanted to come back to for for Anna, for Steve, and for Kristi is, can you just talk a little bit about the mental load and the stress? I think, you touched on that a little bit. I think it would be interesting for each of you to just share a little bit about that.
This is Anna. I could start if you want.
Great. Go ahead.
Yeah, so and thanks for your patience while I transit myself to this event. Yeah, I mean, I would say, one thing that I think is we've heard from interviews from throughout the state of Washington and also in survey data is that, there comes like this sort of emotional burden with having to rely on friends and family for rides, and we shouldn't discount that. Like, that's a real thing. That it is sort of, you always are, negotiating permission with someone to go somewhere, right? When you are asking for a ride. And so just recognizing that that's, part of that and figuring out ways to, we all live in community. It's important to have, community, especially for those of us who live in, if you live in a more rural area and there aren't transit options, but also, what are ways that we can make sure that you don't feel trapped, or that you feel like too much of a burden, or that you feel like you give up the things that are, important to you because it feels like too much of a favor, or you can only ask so many favors to go somewhere. So that's something I'll just highlight.
Yeah, and I think we'll go to Kristi next, and I just want to pick up on what Anna said, that I think one of the powerful things that I've had non-drivers I know say is they really appreciate it when people offer without them having to bring it up. So saying, I'm going to be going into town to do a grocery run on Sunday. Would you like a ride anywhere? And that I felt like was just an aha for me of what a difference it makes to have something offered to you versus, having to ask for it. Kristi, if you want to take yourself off mute and share your thoughts, that'd be great.
Sure. As a person with a lot of complex medical needs, it's already difficult to do all these like coordination tasks because of the energy limitations that I have, and also the cognitive impairment that's improved with some of the treatments that I'm on, but I still like can only do so much cognitive work in one day. Like, this hour might be my max what I can tolerate. But I call them like medical admin tasks. So calling back and forth between doctor's offices and where I have multiple specialists. I think I have 7 doctors right now. You have to call between those, insurance companies, pharmacies, labs, medical supply stores, anything that the doctor may order for like imaging. There's always something that you have to coordinate. And it's very frustrating because if you're not like sick enough for a case manager, like you bear all that responsibility when you're not feeling well. And add to that any stress that you might have for paperwork you need to coordinate. And transportation is also no exception to this. It requires a lot of effort when you have Medicaid to get that ride service. They don't really make it easy, like well known that it's a option. I just knew about it because I had patients that used it in the past when I was a nurse. And then you have to like get certain paperwork done, and you need to have 2 days notice for at least to schedule an appointment. So getting to see a doctor on something that's urgent, that's necessarily or not necessarily qualifying for needing to go to urgent care or the ER, makes it kind of difficult to go in like on a short notice to get in like on a cancellation or something that just kind of buds up that it makes more sense for my doctor to deal with because of the specialty. And I also want to say I kind of have the same feelings that Anna was mentioning, that I feel really guilty to ask for so many things from my family. Friends, it's a little bit more difficult. I have a lot that live out of state, and then I have a lot that live kind of on the outskirts of town. My one friend that used to help me ended up having a baby that has complex medical needs. And so she's often not available to help me out because she's so busy trying to take care of her baby. So it's really difficult trying to find rides outside of family and friends. And the other thing is like the taxis and Ubers. So in this area, taxis are so unreliable. Sometimes you can get one, sometimes you can't. Sometimes they say they're going to come at this time, and that's an hour later, which makes it hard if you have something scheduled that you're taking the taxi for. And of course, it's very expensive. Ubers is kind of the same thing. It's very spotty, very expensive. And then you have to wonder, like, with the mobility aid that I need that day, do they have the ability to transport it? I have an extra long wheelchair. Some of the cars that show up are little teeny cars that have a trunk and that will not fit in the trunk. We have a Subaru Impreza that I had before I became ill, and that's our only car. My partner takes it to work every day. So when he takes me to appointments or anything that I need my mobility aids in, my wheelchair takes up the entire car with the hatchback. There's nothing else that can fit in the back seat of that car. So it makes it very challenging to do all that mental load when you don't feel good. And there's not really anyone else to do it for you. Like, people really can't take that over for you.
Thank you, Kristi. So we're almost out of time, and I did see a couple great, well, all great questions coming in through the chat. I think as we were preparing for this session today, we started to recognize that this could really be a series of conversations. So we're definitely making plans to have more more topics in 2026. The questions that have come up in the chat, I will get answers that we share in the that we share in the follow-up. And I guess one thing, maybe just to end on, it's hard to pick just one. So two quick things. First of all, if you aren't already involved with our mobility action meetups that Moving Maine hosts, we would love to have you sign up for those. Maybe Sarah could put a link in the chat for that. I guess I'll just close with, there were several questions about the white cane law, lots of interest on that, Sadie. So I think we'll definitely want to bring you back and talk more about that. There's also a question about, if you could have just one, what's your top wish as a non-driver? So I think maybe what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Steve. You have 1 minute. So if you want to give us the final word, we'd love to hear from you one more time. What's sort of your top wish as a non-driver for Maine?
I guess my top wish as a non-driver is that if we could create a state plan to have some sort of transit access all around the state, whether it's volunteer transportation that's sort of subsidized or public transportation that's subsidized. A transit option around Maine would be great. That's my top wish.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Kristi, do you want to, looks like we have time for one last thought. Do you want to share your top wish for Maine?
I actually agree with what Steve said, and I'm just going to add to that the extra bonus would be that if we have like a larger public transport in these like rural areas, that it also offers the opportunity to do things outside of normal business hours that you may not be able to attend, which of course, not having the opportunity to go to things in your community makes you feel like you're very isolated. So I think having transport options that go beyond the Monday through Friday to 5 type of hours would be really great.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much. Thanks to all of our kind of cameo folks. And thank you to everybody for attending. We'll be sharing the recording of this, and we'll be in touch about upcoming sessions. Thanks so much.